Melody had spent the morning in the ancient library of her people, where records of the past were kept on crystalline tablets that glowed with soft blue light. The archives held thousands of years of history, from the first awakening of the elf civilization to the present day. She was searching through old texts about the humans, the legendary race that her people believed had vanished from existence long before even the oldest elves were born. The stories described them as warriors and builders, curious creatures who had once walked the stars before mysteriously disappearing. Most elves considered these accounts to be nothing more than folklore, ancient myths passed down through generations to teach lessons about the fragility of great empires. Melody had always been different from other elves. While her peers were content to maintain the peaceful traditions of their world, she wondered about the bigger universe beyond their protective planetary shield. She spent her nights watching the stars from the highest towers of the crystal cities, imagining what lay beyond the darkness. Her dragons seemed to share this curiosity. Zephyr, her silver-blue companion, would often stand beside her and release a soft, contemplative trill, as if he too was pondering the mysteries of space. Ember, with her bronze scales that shimmered like flames in the moonlight, would pace back and forth, her tail moving in patterns that suggested deep thought. The day the signal came through was unlike any other day in Melody's memory. She was in the central grove with her dragons, practicing the ancient dance that strengthened the bond between elf and dragon. This ritual had been performed for countless generations, a way of maintaining harmony and understanding between the two species. As they moved together in perfect synchronization, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. It was not a natural tremor. The vibration had a pattern to it, a rhythm that seemed almost deliberately created. Zephyr's eyes opened wide, and he released a sharp cry that echoed across the forest. The vibration grew stronger, and Melody realized that it was coming from the communication tower in the center of the city. No signal had come through that tower in over 500 years. She ran toward the tower with her dragons flying close beside her. Citizens of Velarath emerged from their homes and workplaces, confusion and concern written on their pale faces. The elves of this world had lived in peace for so long that anything unusual caused alarm. As Melody reached the tower, she could see Elder Thorn standing at the entrance, his ancient face grave and serious. He looked at Melody as she approached, and his silver eyes seemed to recognize something in her that others might have missed. Elder Thorn was the oldest among the council, a being who had witnessed over 3,000 years of the world's history. He had seen times of great change and times of perfect stillness. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. He told Melody that a distress signal had been detected coming from beyond the planetary shield. A vessel of unknown origin was crashing toward their world. The council had been in immediate session, and they had made a decision that involved her specifically. Melody felt her heart race. She asked what the council needed from her. Elder Thorn explained that the signal was old, not in terms of age, but in terms of the technology that created it. It was similar to technology from the ancient archives, technology that matched the descriptions of human ships from the old records. The council believed that this might not be a coincidence, but rather a confirmation of the old stories. They wanted to send an envoy to make first contact with whatever was coming. They wanted that envoy to be someone young, someone strong, someone open-minded. They wanted it to be Melody. The elder explained that she would not be going alone. Her dragons would accompany her. This was crucial, because the beings arriving might be hostile or afraid. The dragons had always possessed an ability to sense the true nature of other creatures, to understand whether threat or peace was present. Zephyr moved closer to Melody, his large head lowering to press gently against her shoulder. Ember stood on her other side, her tail wrapping around Melody's waist in a gesture of support and protection. The dragons seemed to understand what was being asked of them before Melody even fully processed the information. Within hours, Melody was being transported to the crash site by way of the high-speed atmospheric vehicles that the elves used for important journeys. The ride was tense and quiet. Her two dragons sat beside her in the transport pod, their eyes fixed on the view screen that showed the approaching ship. It was massive, larger than any building in the elf cities, and it was clearly suffering severe damage. Entire sections of its hull were blackened and twisted. Smoke and fire trailed behind it as it descended through the atmosphere. This was no peaceful exploratory mission. This was a vessel in desperate trouble, carrying beings who might not survive the next few hours. The transport brought Melody to a clearing near the predicted crash site. She could feel the ground trembling as the ship got closer. The noise was incredible, a roaring sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. Then came the impact. The ground heaved beneath her feet and she fell to her knees. Dust and debris flew into the air, creating a cloud so thick that she could barely see beyond a few feet in front of her. Zephyr and Ember pressed close to her, shielding her with their wings as the dust settled slowly over the next several minutes. When the air finally cleared enough to see, Melody stood and looked at the wreckage before her. The ship was enormous, far larger than it had appeared from above. It had carved a deep trench into the earth and portions of it were still smoking. She could hear sounds coming from within, desperate sounds of beings trying to survive. Melody took a deep breath and began walking toward the nearest opening in the hull. Her dragons moved alongside her, their movements slow and deliberate. They seemed to understand that they were approaching something unprecedented, something that would change everything for all of them. As she got closer to the ship, Melody could see that the crew was trying to exit through a damaged section of the hull. She could see figures moving inside, figures that matched the descriptions from the ancient texts. They had 2 legs and 2 arms like the elves, but their proportions were different. Their ears were rounded, not pointed. Their skin tones ranged from light to dark, not the pale silver of elf skin. These were humans, real humans. Not legends or myths, but living, breathing beings who had somehow traveled across the vast emptiness of space to arrive at her world. A tall human with reddish-brown hair emerged from the ship first. Her clothing was torn and scorched, and she had a deep cut on her forehead that was still bleeding. When she saw Melody, she froze. Her hand immediately moved to a weapon at her side. The human's eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Behind her, other humans began to emerge, each showing signs of injury and trauma. A dark-skinned man helped another human down from the wreckage. This one was younger, perhaps barely conscious. A third human, a woman with blonde hair tied back severely, was checking instruments on a handheld device. Melody raised her hand slowly to show that she meant no harm. The gesture seemed to be understood by the humans, as it was a universal sign of peaceful intent. She took a step closer, and Zephyr moved with her, his massive form now fully visible in the sunlight. The silver-blue dragon's scales caught the light and reflected it like polished mirrors. The humans gasped. The red-haired woman drew her weapon completely and pointed it at Melody. The atmosphere became immediately tense and dangerous. Ember, sensing the escalating danger, did something unexpected. She opened her large mouth and released a sound, not a roar or a growl, but a sound that was almost musical. It was a sound that carried emotion, a frequency of communication that transcended species and language. The sound conveyed no threat, only a message of peace and understanding. The humans lowered their weapons slightly, confused but somehow understanding that the dragon meant them no harm. Melody saw the red-haired woman's face change as she looked at Ember. Fear began to transform into something else, something closer to wonder. Melody took another step forward, and this time neither human nor dragon moved to stop her. She was now standing close enough to the humans to see the details of their faces, their eyes, their expressions. She could feel a connection beginning to form, not through words but through something deeper. This was what her ability allowed her to do. This reading of emotional frequencies, this understanding of the true nature of other beings. She could sense that despite their fear and confusion, these humans carried no evil intent. They were explorers, scientists, beings driven by curiosity just as she was driven by it. The red-haired woman slowly lowered her weapon completely. She spoke, and though Melody did not understand the words, she understood the emotion behind them. The human was asking for help. She was expressing that their ship was damaged beyond immediate repair. She was hoping that Melody might be an ally rather than an enemy. Melody nodded, even though she knew the gesture might not have the same meaning to humans as it did to elves. But something in the human's expression suggested that understanding had begun to form between them, despite the vast differences between their species. The red-haired woman introduced herself as Victoria, the chief engineer of the human vessel called the Horizon Star. She explained through careful words and hand gestures that her crew had been exploring the outer territories of their known space when their propulsion system began to fail. A solar flare had damaged their main power core, and they had been drifting for days before the automated systems detected the presence of a habitable world. Victoria explained that they never expected the world to be inhabited by such an advanced civilization, nor did she expect to encounter creatures as magnificent as the dragons. Her eyes kept moving between Melody and her two companions, wonder and fascination clearly visible on her face. Melody invited them to follow her to a more secure location. The damaged ship was still smoking and unstable, and she could sense through Zephyr and Ember that there were structural dangers that might cause further collapse. The dark-skinned man who introduced himself as Marcus helped support the injured human. His name was David, and he had suffered a serious wound when part of the ship's corridor had collapsed during the impact. The blonde woman was Lieutenant Sarah, the ship's medical officer. She examined Melody and her dragons with professional curiosity, noting down observations in a small electronic device she carried. As they walked away from the crash site, Melody led them toward the nearest elf settlement. It was a small outpost rather than one of the great crystal cities, but it had medical facilities and shelter. The humans followed closely, their weapons lowered but not entirely put away. They were cautious, still not entirely certain whether this was a rescue or a capture. Zephyr and Ember walked slightly ahead, their presence seeming to reassure the humans despite the obvious size difference. Dragons could have easily killed any of them, yet the creatures moved with such grace and purpose that the humans seemed to understand these were not beasts of mindless violence. When they reached the outpost, the elf guards at the entrance were shocked to see the aliens. They moved to stop Melody, but she raised her hand in a gesture of authority. She explained that these beings had come from beyond their world and required immediate assistance. The guards, recognizing Melody's status as a representative of the council, allowed them to pass. Inside the outpost, medical staff quickly moved to help David, who was becoming more seriously injured by the minute. Lieutenant Sarah worked alongside the elf healers, giving them information about the human physiology to ensure that the treatment would be appropriate. Over the next several hours, Melody spent time with Victoria in one of the outpost's larger chambers. They began to communicate more effectively as Victoria started to learn some basic elf words, and Melody learned some words of the human language. Victoria was fascinated by everything around her. She asked about the technology of the elves, about the nature of the dragons, about the government and culture of this world. Melody answered her questions honestly, and in return Victoria told her about Earth, about the human civilization, about the vast distances they had traveled to reach this world. Victoria explained that humanity had become spacefaring only a few centuries ago, in terms of their calendar. They had discovered ancient records suggesting that there had once been a great human civilization that had achieved space travel long ago, but all evidence of that civilization had been lost to time and catastrophe. When the ancient signal had been detected by human astronomers, it had caused great excitement. The decision was made to send an exploration ship to investigate. They never expected to find not only another spacefaring civilization, but also one that was so peaceful and advanced. Victoria said that this discovery could change everything about how humanity understood their place in the universe. Melody found herself sharing information that she probably should have checked with the council first. She told Victoria about the elf civilization, about the thousands of years they had inhabited this world, about their knowledge of the stars and the ancient human technology mentioned in their archives. She explained that elves had assumed humans were extinct, that their return was completely unexpected. Victoria's eyes widened as she listened to these revelations. She immediately asked if Melody would be willing to meet with the council to help facilitate official communication between their two species. The decision was made that Victoria would remain at the outpost while David recovered from his injuries. Marcus and Lieutenant Sarah would return to the crash site with a team of elf engineers to assess the damage to the horizon star. Melody would go to the council to present what she had learned and to discuss the implications of first contact with this human species. Before Melody departed, Victoria reached out and gripped her hand. The human woman's eyes were sincere and full of hope. She said that this moment might be the beginning of something remarkable, something that could benefit both their peoples. She asked Melody to believe in the possibility of cooperation and peace between humans and elves. The journey to the Crystal Council chambers took most of the day. Melody flew on a transport vessel with Zephyr and Ember, the dragons seeming to enjoy the experience of swift travel. As the great crystal spires of the elf capital city came into view, Melody felt both excited and nervous about what lay ahead. She knew that some of the council members would be skeptical about her claims. They might see the humans as a threat, rather than as potential allies. She would need to present her case carefully, and use her ability to read emotional frequencies to help convince them that the humans meant no harm. Elder Thorn was waiting for her in the council chamber. The room was vast and circular, with seats arranged in concentric rings. The council members were already assembled, their ancient faces showing varying degrees of curiosity and concern. There were 12 council members in total, each representing different aspects of elf civilization. There was the Council of Trade, the Council of Learning, the Council of Agriculture, the Council of Military Defense, and many others. Their combined knowledge and wisdom had guided elf civilization for thousands of years. Melody presented her findings carefully. She described her encounter with the humans, her assessment of their peaceful intentions, and her belief that they represented an opportunity for mutual growth and understanding. She explained that the humans had advanced space travel technology, but had not reached the level of sophistication that the elves had achieved over their longer history. She suggested that trade and knowledge exchange could benefit both civilizations. She emphasized that the dragons had not sensed any deception or hostile intent from the humans. The dragons' judgment had never been wrong in matters of truth and intent. The council members discussed among themselves. Some were enthusiastic about the possibility of new relationships. Others were cautious, worried about the dangers of contact with an unknown species. The military representative was particularly concerned about the weapons that the humans carried, and about whether allowing them access to elf technology might eventually result in conflict. Elder Thorn listened to all perspectives and then asked Melody directly whether she believed the humans could be trusted. Melody took a deep breath and answered honestly. She said yes, but she acknowledged that trust would need to be earned through time and continued peaceful interaction. After much deliberation, the council reached a decision. They would formally establish contact with the human civilization through Melody as their primary envoy. A team of elf engineers would help repair the Horizon Star so that the humans could return to their own people and report what they had found. Additionally, an elf delegation would be prepared to travel with the humans back to Earth, to establish formal diplomatic relations, and to begin discussions about potential cooperation and exchange. The council members emphasized that Melody would be responsible for ensuring that this contact remained peaceful and beneficial for both species. The military council member, whose name was Kale, pulled Melody aside after the formal session ended. He explained that while the council had voted for peaceful contact, not all members were completely comfortable with this decision. He warned her that she needed to be cautious, that she should closely monitor the humans for any signs of deception or hostile intent. He told her that the security of the elf world would be her responsibility if she proceeded with this diplomatic mission. Melody understood the weight of his words. She thanked him for his concern and assured him that she would be vigilant. That night, Melody stood on a high tower of the Crystal City with her 2 dragons. She looked out toward the direction of the crash site where Victoria and the other humans were waiting. She thought about what lay ahead, about the potential for alliance and cooperation, but also about the risks and unknowns. Zephyr pressed his head against her side, and she felt the familiar warmth of their connection. Ember paced back and forth, her excitement palpable in the air. These dragons seemed to understand that the world was about to change, that they were on the verge of something historic. Melody made a silent promise to herself that she would do everything in her power to ensure that this first contact between humans and elves would be the beginning of a lasting and meaningful friendship between their peoples. The next phase of the contact mission took several weeks to organize. Elf engineers were sent to the crash site to begin repairs on the Horizon Star. Melody visited the site regularly to monitor progress and to spend time with Victoria and the other humans. She watched as the alien technology was examined and documented by elf scientists. It was fascinating to see how humans had developed different solutions to similar technological problems. Where elves favored crystal-based computing systems that used naturally occurring materials from their world, humans had built intricate mechanical and electronic systems using metal and rare materials from their own world. David, the injured human, recovered well under the care of elf healers. He was grateful and expressed wonder at every aspect of elf medicine and culture. He became friends with several of the elf workers and spent his recovery time learning about their civilization. Marcus, the other surviving crew member, was more reserved. He was a military specialist, trained for defense and tactical situations. While he had accepted the reality of peaceful contact, he remained watchful and cautious. He asked detailed questions about elf military capabilities and recorded information about their defensive systems. Melody understood his caution and did not object, as she expected that humans would want to understand the civilization they had encountered. Victoria became Melody's closest friend among the humans. The two women spent hours together, talking about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams for the future. Victoria told Melody about her childhood on Earth, about growing up in a world very different from Velarath. She described cities of concrete and metal, oceans of salt water, mountains that seemed to touch the clouds. She talked about human art and music, about literature and philosophy. In return, Melody shared the beauty of elf culture, the ancient traditions that had been preserved for thousands of years, the philosophy of harmony with nature that guided elf civilization. One afternoon, as they sat together watching the sun set over the elf forests, Victoria asked Melody a deeply personal question. She asked if Melody had ever felt lonely among her own people, if there had ever been times when she did not fit in with elf society. Melody was quiet for a long time before answering. She admitted that yes, she had sometimes felt that way. She had always been more curious about the wider universe than most elves. She had always questioned the traditions that others accepted without thought. She had felt at times that her spirit was too large for the peaceful, isolated world of Velarath. Victoria gripped Melody's hand and told her that she felt the same way about human society. She said that most humans were content with their small world, with their limited experiences. But Victoria had always wanted more. She had wanted to explore, to discover, to understand. She had volunteered for the space exploration program because she could not stand the thought of living her entire life in one place. She said that meeting Melody had confirmed for her that the universe was far more interesting and complex than she had ever imagined. She said that she hoped they could be friends not just as representatives of their people, but as individuals who understood each other on a deeper level. Melody felt tears forming in her eyes, something that did not happen often to elves. She realized that she had found something rare and precious, a true friend who understood her in ways that many of her own people never could. She embraced Victoria, and the two women held each other for a long time. Zephyr and Ember approached them, and both dragons seemed to sense the emotional significance of the moment. The dragons lay down beside the two women, creating a protective circle of warmth and comfort. The repairs to the Horizon Star progressed faster than initially expected. Elf engineers were impressed by the durability of human spacecraft construction. Despite the catastrophic crash landing, the ship's core systems were still functional. With proper repair and recalibration, the vessel would be capable of returning to human space. As the repairs neared completion, the elf delegation that would travel to Earth was being prepared. It would consist of 10 elf representatives, each chosen for specific expertise and diplomatic skills. Elder Thorn would lead the delegation, his age and wisdom considered essential for such an important mission. Melody was asked whether she would remain on the Horizon Star and continue as the primary liaison between the two civilizations. She agreed immediately, with one condition. She asked if Zephyr and Ember could accompany her to Earth. The request was unusual but not unprecedented. Dragons had occasionally traveled with elf representatives before. The council approved the request, recognizing that the dragon's presence would help facilitate communication and might ease any fears that humans might have about elf intentions. The decision was made that Melody, her two dragons, and the elf delegation would travel to Earth on the repaired Horizon Star. Preparations took on a new urgency as departure date approached. The humans worked closely with elf engineers to ensure that all elf representatives would be comfortable on the spacecraft. Specialized living quarters were prepared with vegetation from Velarath to provide the elves with familiar environmental conditions. The human diet and the elf diet were quite different, so food supplies were arranged for both groups. Communication. Systems were updated to allow for easier dialogue between the species, despite their different languages. Victoria and Melody spent the night before departure together, sitting on the observation deck of the partially repaired ship. They watched stars emerge as darkness fell, each twinkling point of light representing a vast distance of space. Victoria held Melody's hand and told her that she was nervous about bringing her to Earth. She explained that human civilization was not always as peaceful or logical as elf society. She warned that there would be people who would fear the elves and the dragons, people who might see them as a threat rather than as potential friends. She said that not everyone would be as open to new ideas and new relationships as she was. Melody listened to Victoria's warnings and understood them. She knew that first contact between different species was always complicated and potentially dangerous. But she also believed that the core of both humans and elves shared something fundamental, a desire to survive, to grow, and to understand. She told Victoria that she was not afraid of the challenges that lay ahead. She said that she was ready to take this step into a new future, not just for her own people or for humans, but for the relationship that could grow between them. Marcus entered the observation deck and told them that all systems were now ready for departure. The Horizon star would launch the next morning at dawn. The humans who had been stationed on Velarath were preparing to board. The elf delegation was moving their final supplies onto the ship. Everything was in place for the journey that would change the course of history for both civilizations. Marcus looked at Melody with something that might have been respect. He told her that he hoped she would help her people understand that humans were not the primitive beings that some elf historical records described. He said that humanity had come a long way, and that they had much to offer to the galaxy. As the night progressed, Melody found herself unable to sleep. She walked through the sections of the ship with Zephyr and Ember, familiarizing herself with the layout and the human technology. She studied displays that showed the path to Earth, the vast distance that the ship would need to travel. It would take several weeks to reach the human world, depending on the efficiency of the repaired propulsion systems. During that time, she would continue learning the human language and teaching the elf delegation about human culture and history. She would have time to prepare for what might be the most important moment of her life. Standing in the ship's main chamber, Melody placed her hands on the observation window and looked out at Velarath, the only world she had ever known. She could see the crystal spires of the great cities glowing softly in the darkness. She could see the vast forests stretching across continents. She knew that behind her, Victoria was preparing for her own historic journey. Zephyr released a soft trill of encouragement. Ember stood with her head held high, her bronze scales reflecting the starlight. Tomorrow would begin a new era, not just for Melody, but for all of both their peoples. As the dawn approached, Melody felt a sense of profound readiness, as if her entire life had been preparation for this very moment. The launch of the Horizon star was a moment of great importance for both species. Melody stood in the observation deck with Victoria and watched as Velarath grew smaller and smaller as they ascended into the upper atmosphere. The green and blue surface of the world she had known her entire life receded into the distance. For a moment she felt a pang of longing, a sense of farewell to everything familiar. But then she felt Zephyr's presence beside her, a reassuring pressure, and she knew that she was not truly leaving everything behind. Her most precious connections were with her, traveling into the unknown future. The first few days of the journey were filled with activity and adjustment. The elf delegation had to acclimate to life aboard a spacecraft, an environment very different from the natural world they had always known. Some of them struggled with the artificial light and the recycled air. Others found the constant hum of the engines disorienting. Elderthorn seemed to take to spaceflight with remarkable calm. He spent much of his time in the observation areas, studying the stars and contemplating the vastness of space. He told Melody that even for someone his age, seeing the universe from this perspective was humbling and enlightening. Victoria showed Melody the technical aspects of human spaceship design. The engineer was patient and thorough in her explanations, though much of what she described was far more complex than Melody could easily understand. What Melody found most interesting was not necessarily the technical details, but the human approach to problem solving. Humans seem to value ingenuity and adaptability, creating mechanical solutions that were sometimes crude compared to elf technology, but often remarkably effective. Victoria explained that humans had a saying about this, something about necessity being the mother of invention. When you did not have thousands of years to refine a technology, you had to improvise and adapt quickly. Marcus worked with the military representative of the elf delegation, a warrior named Kalen. The two men discussed defense strategies, combat techniques, and the strengths and weaknesses of their respective civilizations' military capabilities. At first, Kalen was hesitant to share such sensitive information, but Marcus explained that such knowledge was necessary for genuine trust between their peoples. He said that the humans wanted to understand the elves as fully as possible, and that meant understanding not just their peaceful qualities, but also their defensive capabilities. Kalen eventually agreed and found that he had much to learn from human tactical thinking. One evening, Melody sat with Elder Thorn in the quiet of the observation deck. The elf leader was gazing out at the stars, his ancient eyes reflecting the distant light. He asked Melody what she thought of this journey, whether she had any regrets about leaving her world. Melody told him honestly that she was nervous about what awaited them on Earth, but that she also felt that she was exactly where she needed to be. She explained that meeting Victoria and the other humans had shown her that the universe was vast and full of possibilities she had never imagined. Elder Thorn smiled, an expression that was rare on his serious face. He told Melody that he had been right to choose her for this mission. He said that many of the younger generation of elves were like her, curious and unafraid of change. He hoped that this encounter with humanity would inspire elf civilization to look beyond their protected world and engage more actively with the galaxy around them. David joined them on the observation deck. The human was fully recovered from his injuries and had taken to exploring the ship with curiosity, similar to what the elves exhibited. He told them that his crewmates had decided to call the elf delegation the Bridge People because they believed that the elves could bridge the gap between human civilization and the broader galactic community. David explained that for centuries, humans had wondered if they were truly alone in the universe. Now they knew that they were not alone, that there were ancient, wise civilizations out there. He said that this knowledge would change human philosophy and science forever. As the weeks progressed, communication between the human crew and the elf delegation improved dramatically. The elf representatives were quick learners of the human language, and they took great interest in human history and culture. They asked questions about human wars, human art, human philosophy. They wanted to understand what drove human beings to create, to explore, to take risks. One elf scholar spent hours with David learning about human music. She was fascinated by the concept of organized sound and emotion, combined into a single form of expression. David played music for her through a human communication device, sounds that ranged from classical symphonies to modern compositions. Melody found herself spending less time with Victoria because of her responsibilities to the elf delegation. But when they did have time together, their friendship deepened. Victoria asked Melody about her dreams for the future, about what she hoped might come from the alliance between their peoples. Melody spoke about the possibility of shared knowledge and resources. She imagined elf technology combined with human innovation, the creation of something greater than either civilization could achieve alone. She spoke about the potential for joint exploration missions, for combined scientific research. But more than anything, she spoke about the importance of friendship, of genuine connection between individuals from different worlds. Victoria took Melody to a small garden area that she and some of the other human crew members had created in one of the ship's maintenance sections. It was a humble space, but it contained plants from Earth, green-growing things that Victoria said reminded her of home. She gave Melody a seedling and explained that it was a plant called a flowering vine, brought all the way from Earth in the ship's supply systems. She told Melody that she wanted Melody to take this plant back to Velarath, to plant it there. She said it would be a symbol of the connection between their two worlds, something living and growing that would remind future generations of both species that they had once come together and formed a friendship. Zephyr and Ember had adapted remarkably well to spaceflight. The dragons found certain areas of the ship more comfortable than others and spent much of their time in the observation areas, watching the stars. Melody sometimes found them standing silently, looking out at the vast universe. She wondered what they thought, what they understood about the journey they were on. She suspected that the dragons understood more than she gave them credit for, that their wisdom extended to comprehending concepts that even ancient elf scholars struggled with. As the journey continued, they received communications from the human home base, the place called Earth Command. They were told that preparations were being made for the arrival of the delegation. Human governments were being notified. Scientific institutions were preparing for the encounter with an alien civilization. There was excitement but also fear. Some humans were worried about what this first contact might mean for human society. Others were thrilled by the possibility of trade and cultural exchange. One night, Melody stood alone on the observation deck and looked toward the small blue point of light that Victoria had told her was Earth. It was so small from this distance, so fragile appearing. She thought about everything that was about to happen, all the introductions and negotiations and discussions that lay ahead. She thought about the responsibility she carried as a representative of her people. She thought about Victoria and the trust that had developed between them. She placed her hand on the observation window and made a silent promise that she would do everything in her power to ensure that this first contact would be beneficial for both the elves and humanity. The final days of the journey passed quickly. As they approached Earth, the human crew became increasingly busy with preparations. Victoria was constantly checking systems, ensuring that everything was functioning properly. Marcus coordinated with Earth Command on the landing procedures. David prepared chambers where the elf delegation would be housed during their time on Earth. The ship's approach was monitored carefully by human defense systems, a precaution that Melody understood even if it made her slightly uncomfortable. She reminded herself that humans were as cautious about unknown visitors as elves would have been. The atmosphere around the horizon star grew tense as Earth came into clear view. The blue and white sphere was breathtaking, beautiful in ways that Velarath was different but equally precious. Melody pressed her face close to the observation window, taking in every detail. The clouds swirled in patterns that suggested vast weather systems. The oceans covered most of the planet in blue, broken up by continents of varying colors and sizes. She could see cities marked by the glimmer of artificial lights, signs that billions of human beings lived down there on that precious world. Victoria came and stood beside her, holding a communication device that she frequently checked. She told Melody that her superiors were eagerly awaiting their arrival. Victoria's voice carried mixed emotions, excitement and nervousness in equal measure. She told Melody that once they landed, everything would become real and official in a way that it had not been during their journey through space. The encounter between human and elf would no longer be a small group of explorers and envoys. It would become a matter of planetary importance, involving governments and world leaders. Victoria warned Melody again that some humans might not be as accepting as she was. She emphasized the importance of remaining calm and diplomatic. No matter what reactions they encountered, Elder Thorn and the elf delegation gathered in the main chamber as they began their descent toward Earth. The old elf leader seemed remarkably composed, though Melody could sense a subtle energy around him that suggested deep concentration. He addressed his people, reminding them of their role as ambassadors for elf civilization. He told them that their behavior during this first contact would influence human understanding of elves for generations to come. He stressed the importance of dignity and openness, of being willing to learn about human culture while sharing the wisdom of their own. He concluded by saying that this mission represented perhaps the most important moment in recent elf history, a chance to prove that ancient civilizations could coexist peacefully with younger, more recently spacefaring species. The landing was surprisingly smooth. Melody had expected a jarring impact, but the human pilots had prepared well. The horizon star descended through Earth's atmosphere with surprising grace. Through the observation ports, Melody could see the sky change from the black of space to deeper blues, and then to lighter colors as they approached the ground. She could see weather phenomena unlike anything on Velarath. Thunderclouds with visible lightning, wind patterns that created visible disturbances. The ship touched down on what Victoria explained was a specially prepared landing field at a human installation called a spaceport. As the ship settled onto the ground, Melody felt Zephyr and Ember move closer to her. The dragons seemed to understand that they were about to enter a completely unknown environment. Melody placed her hands on their heads and silently transmitted her own courage and calm through their shared bond. She could feel their response, a sense of readiness mixed with cautious curiosity. The dragons had never truly experienced the sky of a world beyond Velarath, and the sensation of landing of solid ground after weeks of weightlessness seemed to comfort them. The airlock doors opened, and Victoria led the elf delegation outside. What greeted them was overwhelming. Hundreds of human beings were gathered at a distance, held back by barriers and uniformed human security personnel. The humans were shouting, though at a distance and disciplined enough not to rush forward. Cameras and recording devices were pointed at the elves and dragons from every direction. It was a sensory experience that even the ancient elves had not fully anticipated. Melody could sense the elf delegation's shock at the sheer volume of attention and noise. Then she saw the human leaders. Several individuals in formal clothing approached, accompanied by security teams. One woman, elderly and dignified, stepped forward. Victoria whispered to Elder Thorn that this was the leader of one of Earth's major political organizations. The woman introduced herself with formal courtesy and welcomed the elf delegation to Earth. She expressed the hope that their visit would be the beginning of a peaceful and mutually beneficial relationship between their species. Elder Thorn responded with equal formality, expressing gratitude for the welcome and affirming that the elves came as friends and seekers of knowledge. The human media was fascinated by everything, but they seemed particularly captivated by Zephyr and Ember. Melody could sense the dragon's discomfort with the constant attention, the flashing lights, and the noise. She moved closer to them, providing reassurance through her presence. She realized that she had a responsibility not just to her people, but to her dragons as well. She needed to help them adapt to this overwhelming environment. She began to walk slowly, allowing Zephyr and Ember to explore the landing field at their own pace, gradually acclimating to the sights and sounds of Earth. Victoria joined Melody and helped her navigate the human attention. The engineer explained some of the protocols that needed to be followed, the specific route they would take to the headquarters of the International Space Administration. The elf delegation was placed in specially prepared vehicles designed to transport large groups. As they drove through the human city, Melody watched the landscape pass by with wonder. The buildings were tall, reaching toward the sky in ways that resembled elf architecture but created through completely different means. The streets were crowded with humans of all types, their various skin tones and features indicating incredible diversity within the human species itself. The headquarters facility was enormous. There were massive conference rooms where detailed discussions would take place. There were residential areas prepared specifically for the elf delegation. There were laboratories where scientists from both species could collaborate. There were libraries containing human knowledge in formats that would be accessible to the elves. Everything had been prepared with careful attention to make the elf visitors as comfortable as possible. Special chambers were created for Zephyr and Ember, large open spaces with observation areas where humans could safely view the dragons without causing them stress. Over the following days and weeks, formal diplomatic discussions began. Elder Thorn and the other elf representatives met with human leaders and scientists. Trade possibilities were discussed. Cultural exchanges were planned. Scientific collaboration projects were proposed. The humans were particularly interested in elf technology, especially their crystal-based computing systems and their renewable energy sources. The elves were fascinated by human innovation and their particular approach to solving problems through trial and error and rapid iteration. Melody spent much of her time with Victoria, helping to facilitate specific discussions and serving as a cultural liaison. She witnessed moments of tremendous hope and moments of frustration when language barriers or cultural differences made communication difficult. But overall, the momentum remained positive. Humans and elves were finding common ground, discovering that beneath their obvious differences, there were fundamental similarities in how they approached important questions about survival, growth, and meaning. One evening, Victoria took Melody to a location on Earth that she said was particularly beautiful. It was a high-elevation area with a clear view of the sky as it approached darkness. From there, Melody could see Earth's moon rising, a massive object illuminated by the distant sun. Victoria held her hand and told her that for centuries humans had stared at that moon and wondered what lay beyond. Now they knew that there were worlds beyond their own, that they were part of a broader community of intelligent beings. Victoria said that this knowledge had changed everything about how humans understood their purpose in the universe. Melody asked Victoria what would happen next, what the future might hold for their friendship. and for the relationship between their peoples. Victoria was quiet for a long time before answering. She said that she did not know exactly, but that she believed the future could be remarkable. She explained that humans were at a threshold moment in their history, a time when they could either close themselves off from the galaxy or open themselves to new possibilities. The visit of the elf delegation, the presence of the dragons, all of this was helping humans make that choice to embrace openness and connection. Zephyr and Ember joined them at the observation point, and the two women stood with the dragons watching as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Melody reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this place, to this moment. She thought about the small elf girl who had wondered about the stars, who had felt too large for her own world. She thought about how meeting Victoria had changed her life, had opened possibilities she had never imagined. She realized that this was what the universe offered to those willing to reach beyond their comfortable boundaries, willing to take risks in pursuit of connection and understanding.